We have a terrific speaker today, which is why I know you are all here. But before that, I want to say that the seminar committee is meeting today from 2 to 4 for our annual retreat. And we would really love it if you would give us any ideas or suggestions that you have for topics. We're going to be talking about the 2023 year and who we'd like to hear from, what presenters, what ideas or suggestions you have for topics. And what I've done is I've got a little clipboard here. If you have any ideas or presenters, and believe me, you'd be amazed who we can get to come and present to a church. So if you have an idea, please put it down and put your email by it in case we have any questions. All right. So really would help us out if you give us any ideas that you have or like who you'd like to hear from. All right. Thank you so much for being here. We have a terrific person. We have, as you probably read in the bulletin, Steve House, who is the Senior Director for Research Initiatives for Braver Angels, which probably you are all aware of, but is a national organization that's been working for some time now to bring together liberals and conservatives to find common ground, to try to reduce some of the argumentation so that we can hear each other. I've asked Steve today to speak on a more personal level. So if you're sitting at Thanksgiving with that one uncle who won't stop, yeah, right. And you think, okay, another Thanksgiving ruined. How do you talk to him? Or how do you talk to that grandma who's just watches Fox TV all the time? That's for all of us, right? Steve's the perfect guy for us because to give a little background on him, he has, I think, 25 years experience in the health field. He was an executive. And then he at the same time, he was chair for, I think, 2 or 3 years of the Colorado Republican State Party. So I warned him he was coming into a den of liberals. And he says, hey, that's okay. That's what I do. and so I'm really looking forward to hearing from him. Without any more ado and anything more from me, let's please welcome, maybe with a round of applause, Steve House.
Thank you, Sue. Let me start with a story that goes back to 2019. I was about to announce a run for the United States Congress in Colorado's 6th congressional district. I was, of course, formerly the state party chairman for the Republican Party. So most people in Colorado thought of me as Mr. Republican. I wasn't ultra conservative, but a good voice for the party. I got an invitation from a friend of mine to attend a Braver Angels workshop. And I said, what is Braver Angels? And he said, you'll understand better when you go to this workshop. I said, okay. So I trusted him. 3 hours of my time. I'm going to a workshop. It's something about red and blue. And so I get to the workshop and realize what it is a opportunity to have partnerships with people from the other political party to work through issues to see if you could figure out how to communicate more effectively and depolarize a bit, because obviously polarization is a real big problem. Sue mentioned Thanksgiving. A lot of people don't know this, but Thanksgiving is now 18 minutes shorter on average because of political issues ruining the dinner and people breaking up and going home, which is just a tragic sort of thing. But anyway, I go to this workshop, and as it turns out, I'm going to be paired up with a Democrat, and he gets a chance to stand up and introduce himself like we all do. And I'll never forget the introduction. He stands up, his name is Roger, and he says, my name is Roger. I'm a progressive liberal. My parents were, my grandparents were. I've never voted for a Republican. I don't like Republicans. There are no Republicans with good ideas, and I don't know how I'm going to get through the day paired up with one. And I thought, to my friend who told me this was going to be a painless experience, I looked at him like, are you kidding me? I have to pair myself up with a guy that's got that start. He doesn't like me right off the bat. Well, the net of it was 3 hours of working together on issues from healthcare to abortion to just generally how we got to be who we were politically. At the end of the discussion, Roger stands back up and says, I was wrong. I met a good Republican. He has a lot of good ideas. We agree on what the problems in America are. We don't agree on how to solve the problems necessarily, but I like him. And quite frankly, if he runs for Congress, I live in his district, I'm going to vote for him. And ultimately, Roger called me. We kept in touch. In fact, we kept in touch until recently when he passed away. But Roger called me on the day he cast a vote for me for the congressional election. And I thought, of all the things you could possibly do in 3 hours, being able to make that kind of progress was just so significant for me. And Roger is not the only one who I have that type of relationship with. ultimately, Roger's story is not uncommon to a lot of us who work at Braver Angels. The organization is dedicated to depolarizing, and it's really, really important. The American Security Project is one of our business partners, and they tell us that, frankly, polarization is the greatest threat to national security we have. If we can't get along better in Congress, if we can't get along better at the family table or at Thanksgiving, if we can't get along better in the churches because we're too polarized, it's just ultimately going to be the undoing of America and what we believe in. So what happens with Braver Angels is interesting, in my opinion. What happened with Roger has happened in something else. Another project that I've been involved with Braver Angels is called one-on-ones. What happens with one-on-ones are you can set yourself up to have a structured conversation. Everybody here can do this by going onto our website and requesting a one-on-one. There's a couple of different ways to do a one-on-one. You can do a red-blue one-on-one where they'll pair you up with somebody of the opposite political party. You can do a black-white one-on-one, or you can do a rural-urban one-on-one, which has been a very interesting play for us. In the state of Wisconsin, they requested some information on how to stop the rural-urban divide. A lot of farmers, a lot of people out in the lower populated areas just didn't believe that the cities had their best interest in mind. And so we started with one county, Greene County, Wisconsin, in southern Wisconsin. By the time we got through 3 or 4 workshops to help them with rural-urban divides and skills for bridging the divide, which is one of the primary workshops we start with, every single county in the state had heard about it, and we've now trained every single county in the state of Wisconsin on Braver Angels workshops, and we've just had tremendous results. People say they're 80% less polarized, they're more willing to talk to people, but the secret comes, in my opinion, in this one-on-one type structure. You don't have to do a one-on-one to get this, but here's what happens. You get a 2-hour conversation scheduled, 1 hour at a time. Frankly, you can turn down the second hour if the first hour doesn't go well. And usually you do the 2 one-hour conversations, a week or 2 apart. The first one I had, I was paired up with a young lady from California who had lived in 3 cities in her life: New York, San Francisco, and LA. And she was, very socially and progressively liberal. We structured the conversation. Her name was Rachel. I think she was 34 years old. And Rachel and I had a great conversation. She couldn't believe that we were actually having a conversation because she just did not like the Republicans at all. And the fundamental thing that changes it is when you start to understand why people believe what they believe. For example, in Rachel's case, I asked her the question, why are you a liberal Democrat? And she explained to me that her parents were. That's how she grew up. She'd been watching, the news based on her parents' perspective and her grandparents' perspective. And otherwise, she just had this fundamental belief until we started talking about maybe how we should fix healthcare, an area of my expertise, and a few other things. Rachel and I maintain contact now. In fact, the 5 one-on-ones I've done so far, all of them exchange information with me on a regular basis, which I never would have had that opportunity if it wasn't for Braver Angels and learning what we do and why we do it. And the most important thing, though, is why do they believe what they believe? When you get there, you start to really make progress on what's going on in someone's life and why they would choose the decisions that they make. So we do these workshops. They're free. We've done thousands of workshops. I think it's over 11 or 1,200 now. We've got 12,000 members across the country, 80 alliances that operate. So it's a fairly large organization and it's moving quickly. We've done workshops for members of Congress. We took 2 Minnesota congressmen, one red, one blue, their staffs, and we did a workshop between them. They get along better today than they ever have, and they see the need to continue to do this. There's a lot of other aspects to Braver Angels that really, really play out well. One is we do a university debates program. And the University Debates Program has now done more than 400 debates on college campuses across the country, from Baylor University to Duke to smaller colleges. I don't know if we've done the University of Florida, Sue. We may have done one there. But these are debate programs where we're debating the toughest issues in the land: climate change. We're debating abortion. We're debating, socioeconomic issues. We're debating all kinds of stuff. And the students come away with a much greater understanding of how to talk to each other. So those debate programs continue. We now have a team. We started out with a couple of people. We have a team of about 20 people who do nothing but work on the demand for college debates from a Braver Angels perspective across the country. Our goal is to create communication, to be able to get people to talk to each other. We have what's called a partners program. Next year in July, the first week of July, I think it starts on the 6th for 4 days, we have a convention that we're doing And we're doing it coincidentally at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So obviously the context of a civil war and some of the stress we see in polarization really comes down to, how can we help solve this problem so we don't end up in a civil war? Whether it's a fought civil war or just a war between peoples that gets to the point where America is so alienated that it can't function. So we're doing that. And we have partners that we enlist to come and join us. A partnership doesn't cost you anything. You get free memberships to Braver Angels. You got obviously get information, and we send a couple of delegates from each partnership go to the convention in Gettysburg. Why is this important for churches? Half of all of our partners in that convention are likely to be churches. We're actually working with University of Kentucky's church organization. We're doing it with organizations in almost every single state. And it doesn't matter the denomination. It's, Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, non-denominational, Catholic, Mormon. They're all represented because churches are having as much trouble communicating as anyone. We're also doing it with businesses. We have plenty of businesses: General Mills, Target, Lucasfilms, Disney. There's a lot of organizations like that have used Braver Angels in their workshops. Frankly, a lot of them start with their board. They start with their board because the board is divided politically. So they have to figure out how to communicate with each other at the board level. Otherwise, they don't successfully get to where they need to go and make decisions that they need to make. It's become so polarized. We do it with the boards, we do it with steering groups, we do it with church leadership groups so that we can depolarize them. We also are working with groups like the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Clubs and Rotary and Kiwanis Club. So there's a lot of Braver Angels connection out there. And I think it's important that we learn to communicate with each other. From a church perspective, I'm a longtime church goer. I've done sermons in church as a certified lay pastor myself. And I think that it goes to why we believe in God and what we look for in the behavior of people who are existing in the same world. We're all God's children. We ought to be able to talk to each other and set politics aside. And there's a really effective way of doing that. So that's part of what we do. We have a saying in Braver Angels that we build communication skills. We also recommend to groups like yours a second organization that's a much smaller organization, but they do some amazing work. They're called Break Bread. And what Break Bread does is go from communication to trust. And we had a unique opportunity where the CEO of Braver Angels, myself, our lead moderator, and 2 or 3 other people who've been very involved in Braver Angels went through a Break Bread evening symposium. And literally you do it over dinner, whether it's a Zoom dinner, which always is a little strange, but or you do it live as a group. And you dig into one issue in a much deeper way, and it becomes a incredible conversation, and it really does build trust. So I recommend to people quite frequently that what they ought to do is go through some basic Braver Angels workshops and then go through Break Bread, at least at the leadership level, and then try to parrot that down to the rest of the organization, because it makes all the difference in the world if you can go from just communication to some level of trust. So we do those kinds of works. We do family and politics workshops. We do depolarizing from within. Sue indicated to me that most of the group here is probably blue. I would probably start with a skills for bridging the divide workshop and then do a depolarizing from within. As a Republican, when I do depolarizing from within with other Republicans, at some point during the workshop, you sort of laugh at each other because you can't believe the nicknames you use for Democrats. You can't believe some of the stuff you do. And then frankly, you get kind of embarrassed that you would refer to people that you would otherwise think of as normal, upstanding citizens in a negative connotation simply because of which political party they belong to. So doing those kind of workshops, I think, would be very, very important, especially skills for bridging the divide to start, and then working on depolarizing from within. Finding another church in the area. If you can't do it, we probably could find another church, because we have a lot of connections that has a fair amount of conservative members, and we can put conservative members together with the members you have that are more liberal and do a red-blue workshop. I wouldn't hesitate to do that at any point in time because it works very, very effectively, and the community tends to come together. With that in mind, one of the other programs we're doing right now is called the Cities Project. So far, we've identified 4 cities: Richmond, Virginia, Birmingham, Alabama, Wichita, Kansas, and I think it was going to be El Paso, Texas, but I'm not so sure with what's going on in El Paso that we'll be doing it there. But fundamentally, what we do is we go into a city, we engage local politicians, local church leaders, local business leaders, And we look at and measure, usually with the university's help. University of Alabama's been a partner of ours, so has University of Wisconsin and others. And we'll measure what's going on in the town. Same thing could be done at your church, right? I mean, we could probably find a researcher inside of Gainesville that would do a research project on polarization inside the church. And then we take that and we try to affect change and measurable change in the city. I think it's going to be a great project. We don't do it alone. We do it with an organization called StoryCorp, and we do it with One America, which is a religious or faith-based organization, to try to make the city function better. I think that's a better strategy, frankly, than trying to do it in Washington, D.C., because doing it in Washington, D.C. right now is just a very difficult task, when in reality, we think the local communities are far more important for us and for the people in those communities to be able to make progress on the issue of polarization. Frankly, America's 246 years old now, 247 years old now. And if we don't fix it, most democracies last about 250 years. I'm not saying it's going to end in 3 or 4 years. I'm not saying it's going to last 3 or 4 more years either. We've got to find a way to get depolarized at all levels, but especially from the local levels upward, so that we can stop the erosion of American values and, you know, people fighting over issues that really need to get solved, like healthcare and education and some of the other stuff out there that's deteriorating as we speak, and we need to fix it. So ultimately for Braver Angels, our big deal is we'll work with anyone. It's a structured workshop. You follow a process. It's fun. It's done on Zoom. It's done on hybrid. We've done it, you know, the hybrid lately, where people are in person at times, and sometimes they're also on Zoom at the same time, just like this meeting is taking place. And we do it a lot of, you know, live, everybody in the room sort of stuff. And we've done it with, you know, sibling cities as a project. That's another project that may exist in Gainesville, whether you're aware of that or not, where it's 2 cities, one that tends to be more blue and the other more red. And we've brought cities together and literally had them do workshops together. And it really works out to be a very, very positive experience. Other than that, I want to open it up for questions. I know we've got some time left, but I think it's better that we get into a debate and answer some questions. Would love to see us, in your case, consider a couple of things. One would be, you know, let's try a workshop. We've got moderators who would come down and do a workshop for the church, depolarizing or skills for bridging the divide. You know, spend some time on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, understand how it works, see the effect of it. I know the one thing that I will say, when I did the workshop, the red-blue workshop, as a Republican, I was running in a very blue district. My objective was to help the nation understand a better way to do healthcare. And in the meantime, while I used the Braver Angels techniques as a candidate, I got an endorsement from the NAACP. I spent probably three-hour interviews on the radio with Black Lives Matters, talking about their issues and how I saw them. An incredible response to it as a Republican, but I never changed my values. It was simply the fact that Braver Angels taught me to understand why people were where they are with those organizations and what they were looking for. And we had great conversations. And, you know, I wasn't afraid of the issues because I learned how to talk about the issues in a way that was not polarizing through the Braver Angels process. So I didn't win the district because it was heavily Democrat. There was an incumbent there. But I will say that having those kind of endorsements and the progress we made on things like prison reform and other things was just a miracle, in my opinion. And I owe that to what I learned from Braver Angels about how to communicate effectively in a depolarized way. So, Sue, I'd open it up for questions if anyone has questions or you want to debate a particular issue.
Steve, so in order for the people on Zoom and for Steve to hear you, in order for the people on Zoom and for Steve to hear you well, Jeff just reminded me, to put it under my mouth, I need to get this microphone to you. So if you have a question, would you please raise your hand and I'll pass the microphone to you.
Well, Steve, my question has to do with the inability of some Republicans to place much value on democracy. How do you speak to someone like our local representative who refuses to even believe that we have another president now?
Yeah, and that's one of those things where if I knew that issue before I came down to do a workshop with you guys, I would set up an appointment with that representative and have a real conversation about it. One of the things about having been a state party chairman one of the 50 people who ran the Republican Party during that period of time, is it gives me the opportunity to see people on the right quite frequently. They'll entertain me because of that credibility. And I think what has to happen is, I think, quite frankly, we should do a one-on-one between that representative and somebody on the blue side and get that issue on the table. I don't know why he sees it that way, because I clearly believe that, we're a representative republic, but at the local level, we're democracies. There sure should be a commitment to that, just like there is to, the First Amendment and the other aspects of the Constitution. So if you told me who that was, or had Sue get that name to me, I'll have a conversation with him proactively and see where he stands on all that. Believe me, there are some people in both sides of the aisle out there in this world, whether they're mayors, city council people, county commissioners, or state representatives, who are very hardline. Because, think about this, and you brought up an issue that really bothers me. In the United States of America, there are 435 seats in the U.S. House, and of those seats, there's only 50 some that are competitive. The other 350 or so are just really not competitive. And that means the guys that are in non-competitive seats, they basically follow the party hard line, go as far right or far left as they can. They don't all do that, but there's a fair number of them do that. I dislike that a lot. I think the seats should be more competitive and they should be more representative. But until something changes, they're not going to be.
Okay, we have another question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm 13 and I am transgender. So a lot of the legislation that's been going on, especially from the right side parties, has been very deeply affecting me and my family. My mom is a Democrat and my dad was a Republican, and I had very horrible experiences
I've lost his mic.
with being taken to boat.
The mic cut out for a minute. So you talked about your mom and your dad, and then go ahead from there.
So my dad, he was heavily Republican, and I've had horrible experiences with the right side, being taken to boat rallies and being taken to events. Oh goodness. Is that right? Hello?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Okay. One more time. So I've had a very bad experience with the right side, as my dad, he would take me to boat rallies and other kind of events for the Republican side. And it got worse from there when I came out to my dad as transgender, who is a heavily Republican man. He kicked me out at 11. And I have just had completely horrible experiences with the Republican Party. And I have been trying incredibly hard to learn to, live with that, but it is still incredibly hard. Do you think that these workshops would help for someone who has had such bad experiences, like just besides their family being heavily Democratic? Like, do you think these kind of workshops could help with having actual horrible experiences?
Yes. In fact, it's interesting that this question comes up, because I just did a one-on-one with a woman from Minnesota, obviously a Democrat, and she had a child who was also transgendered. And, in the conversation with her, it became clear, even though I am well-read and I have been politically involved for a while, there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think that what happens in a workshop like this is people on the right, not everybody on the right. I have compassion for the situation you're in, but there's just a big misunderstanding. And I think that's part of what happens. So first, you're red versus blue. I automatically discount you because you're blue. You discount me because I'm red. That's typical. So then how are you supposed to communicate understanding and awareness of a difficult issue if you don't consider the other person to be valid based on their political ideology? So the answer is yes. Workshops that depolarize from within, for example, one on the right, one on the left, skills for bridging the divide. Those workshops, if we put your father, your mother, and others in a workshop like that, I believe you'd find that when they walked away from the workshop, the first thing that would happen is they would want to understand you and how you feel better. And they would want to understand the issue better, because I got a good education in my one-on-one. I've got a second one-on-one with the same lady coming up for our second hour. And the entire hour is going to be spent talking about transgender issues, because that's the issue that's most important to her. And I need more of the education. It's really an education issue. I don't find people on the right to be discompassionate or unfeeling. It's more unaware and ignorant about certain issues. I don't think you should live with it. I think you should encourage them to get involved in a workshop so that you can actually get people to have some level of awareness of what your situation is like, what you believe, why you believe it, and then get them to be educated on the issues you face, because it can't be easy. And that's basically what we see happen when we do workshops like this.
I'm wondering, suppose I go to a workshop, I gain the skills, and then I approach a family member with whom I have history of polarization. Right away, you are seen as the other side. Is it possible to speak to that person without taking them to a workshop? In other words, I've got the skills. They may not have the skills.
Yeah, and there's a way to do that. That's part of why we talk about skills for bridging the divide. I frankly run into it all the time in my own family. And essentially what I do is I talk to people about them and what they believe. I don't give them my beliefs right off the bat. They may already make an assumption. I mean, my family all knows that I'm a Republican because I was in the news a lot. But that doesn't mean that I walk up to, you know, the liberal Democrats who I love as members of my family and say, you know, you should really change your belief about this. I walk up to them and ask them about their life, what's going on, what's concerning them. We talk about the issue. You know, why do you think we should have, you know, a single payer healthcare system, for example, or, you know, how should we treat gay rights differently than we do today? You know, it's about learning to talk to them about what their issues are and get to the why on their side. Invariably, what happens is when someone tells you a story about themselves or their situation, before you're done, they want to know what you think. And so they draw it out of you on what you think. And what your job is, what you learn in Braver Angels is, it's not my job to change Andrew's from a Democrat to a Republican, or to make him believe the values are different between the two of us and that he should see my values. My job is to depolarize, de-escalate the issue, and then have a meaningful conversation about it. Just because I'm not asking you or anyone else to change your values doesn't mean that we ultimately don't come to an agreement on what we need to do to solve a problem. Because frankly, once you've humanized somebody by understanding why they believe what they believe, it changes everything. Roger and I had wonderful conversations. My business partner for the last 2 years at Braver Angels, Randy Liaz, is about as far left of a Democrat as you can get. Randy and I work together every single day. Once we got to know each other, it became fairly easy. We don't avoid issues. I mean, sometimes we debate real issues. We get into real discussions about issues and we debate them, but we never lose respect for each other because we've gone through the process of learning how to communicate and who each other really is and how we got to this point. So yeah, there's definitely a way once you go through the workshop that you can talk to somebody who hasn't been through it and then encourage them to go through a workshop if they need it. If you want to, take them with you to a workshop and have that conversation there. But first establish why they believe what they believe and, you know, be curious about them and you'll see what happens.
Is there a network for Braver Angels in all the states? And if not, is there a strategy to do that?
Yeah, when I say alliances, they are state or local based alliances. So the 50 states each have an alliance with 2 leaders, one red, one blue, in every state. Florida's not any different than that. But on top of those 50, there's another 30 that are partial state alliances in places where there's a lot of activity. For example, in Colorado, where I come from, there's an alliance in Denver itself because it's a big portion of the population. And then there's a state alliance. Those alliance leaders are there. Once you go to a meeting or, you know, attend a workshop and get involved, what happens is you get on a list where you get information from them. They don't spam you, but there's a lot of information available. You meet other Braver Angels leaders. They become a good part of your network. I have plenty of people in this organization. I have more Democrat friends inside of Braver Angels than I did when I was the state chairman And I was really good friends, still am, with the state Democrat chairman in Colorado. He and I were great friends and great networks, but Braver Angels has lots and lots of opportunity to network. And there is something in every state, and probably Florida has multiple alliances at this point.
Could you give us an example of the strategies and skills that would be taught in a workshop to help with depolarization?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of different ways to do it, but one of the things you do in a red blue, for example, is the reds meet with the reds and the blues meet with the blues, and they talk about how they view the other side. It's a very interesting exercise because you'll put the reds in a circle, and the blues will be outside the circle, and the reds will talk about blues, and the blues get to hear them. They get to hear them. They don't get to comment on that part, but there's a moderator that facilitates the discussion, and they start to understand, like I said, nicknames, things that they, call them, libtard, for example, or, some of the ultra MAGA names, those names come out, you talk about them as a group, you understand why they're being used, and you start to realize that, you learned in kindergarten, don't call people names. I mean, sticks and stones will break my bones, but at the same time, calling people names just doesn't make sense. So you learn that type of thing. You also learn communication style. How do you respond to somebody who's accusing you of being a hatred-based person, someone who hates things? How do you respond when that comes up without calling them a hater back? You learn those kinds of techniques. You learn a lot about the other side. You really get educated about the other side in some of the workshops, but Skills for Bridging the Divide is all about how to communicate effectively under duress and de-escalate the conversation to something meaningful. And like I said, the surveys have been the 64 counties of Wisconsin gave us an 88% rating on 88% said they improved significantly by going through the workshops on their ability to communicate with the other side.
Thank you. We don't want to ignore our online audience. If anybody online would like to ask a question, can you either physically raise your hand or put up your chat hand? And Tristan, tell me, do we see anybody? Okay, well, if you are interested, just raise your chat hand or put your hand up physically, and Tristan and I will monitor it. All right.
I'm Susan Andrews' mom. I also work in healthcare. I'm at the university as a teacher. I've been censored. I've had to go to courses on how to adjust our speech patterns and phraseology to avoid getting in trouble. And I am always trying to neutralize and come to a situation where we can move forward with our goal in healthcare rather than spending time on politics. And people will say something like, "Isn't our governor just the best?" or something like that. And so could you give me a couple of specific phrases that I could use to kind of de-escalate, neutralize, move along, so that even if someone else is aware of this program, they might catch on like, me too, I'm in it with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, especially with a governor that's so well known. I think if someone came to me and said, "Isn't our governor the best?" and I was trying to convince them that they needed to be more compliant with their diabetes drugs or be healthier, in general, I probably would say, I'm glad you feel that way. Now let's talk about your diabetic drugs, or acknowledge for them that, they said something, and you don't have to say, "I agree with you." Just simply say, "I'm glad you feel that way," and move on and do something different. I think that where it becomes a problem is that when you push back and say, "Well, I don't like him," you may in fact not like him, but by doing that, you invite the conversation to debate over whether you like or not like the governor. And in your case, you said you wanted to move on. I would simply acknowledge their feeling, not necessarily agree with it, and move on to the subject at hand. And I think you'll find that works fairly well. That's one of the skills we test a lot in a workshop. Sometimes it gets a little, there can be stress in a workshop. I mean, people walk in with their arms folded and they're uninterested in communicating with the other side whatsoever. And at the end of our workshop, there's, hundreds of videos where everybody's hugging each other at the end because they realize that it is really another human being. And you know what? They have a different opinion because they come from a different place. They may have been grown up in an entirely conservative household, told things that weren't necessarily always true, but that's all they know. And if that's all they know, you can't hold them responsibility for knowing something else than all they know from where they were brought up. You just have to acknowledge and move the conversation to where you want to go.
I've noted that there's a talk about common ground. Is the point really common ground, or is it mutual respect? In other words, we may end the conversation with the problem is still the same problem, and we may disagree about what to do about it, and we understand the other side much better, but we've never really come to a common ground. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's really sequential in that you have to develop respect first. If you won't listen to what someone has to say, you're never going to get to common ground. And common ground in the context here is much like Roger and I discussed in that initial workshop. It was, we do have a problem with healthcare. You know, we have the costliest system in the world, and, you know, our outcomes and how long we live is not where it needs to be. We both agree with that. The question is, how do we get there, right? I mean, you know, I have my own ideas on how to get there. He had his own ideas on how to get there, but we both agreed that the basic problems in healthcare, we had common ground on. The same with education, the same with, you know, parking and potholes in Denver, right? I mean, we had a lot of common ground issues, and we were willing to talk about them. And I was willing to hear his ideas on why he thinks we should fix it and what way we should fix it, just like he was willing to listen to me. Prior to that workshop, if I'd have said to Roger, I don't think a single payer healthcare system is the answer. There's other solutions. He would never have listened to me because he didn't know who I was other than by, you know, public image. And we had not had a conversation to talk about why we believe what we believe. Once we got that respect, then we went to common ground. After that, getting a group of people, I mean, city councils are really an interesting place. You know, county commissions. The worst politically polarized organization ever is a homeowners association. I don't recommend anybody get involved in that if they don't really want pain. But the rest of it is, you know, you can actually find a way to have a conversation in a city council meeting. We've done workshops for them where they start to really talk about the actual issues and get past the political, you know, polarization and the soundbite stuff. So respect comes first, common ground comes second.
My name's Allison. I'm married to a Republican. And yes, I wasn't going to tell on you, but that's all right. Scott's still coming. My husband can't come here anymore because of the extreme views of this church. We do not get along politically, and so we struggle, especially on election years. But what we try to do is find the answers, because I say this is true, and he goes, that's absolutely not true. This is true, and I said that's absolutely not true. So we look on the internet for source material to find the actual facts, and we have completely failed. We cannot find truth. It's all statistics that are slanted this way or that way. So what do you say about that?
Well,
And wait 1 minute, Steve, before you visit, we have another service at 11:15. So I should have made this announcement before. If anybody wants to leave to attend that service, now's a good time. And if you want to stay, please do stay. As long as you can stay, Steve. Are you all right for a little bit?
I'll answer questions as long as they have them.
Okay, great. All right, thanks.
So
all right, go ahead.
That issue is an interesting one because I spent 2 years on a COVID task force. I was appointed by the president in early 2020. And of course, there's tremendous amounts of conflicting information about COVID and vaccines itself. I think, first of all, we have a great workshop called Families and Politics. You know, you do it in a church is a very common place to do it, where you both come. I think the thing you got to get away from is, you're right. I mean, I remember the days I grew up with Dan Rather and Harry Reasoner and Walter Cronkite, and if they said it, I believed it. Today, it's not quite that way. Everybody spins the news one way or the other and the facts one way or the other. What typically happens in your scenario is we help you come to an agreement on what the issues are that are important. So first of all, let's take all the issues that aren't really important to you and to him off the table, because all they do is create fodder for arguments. I mean, I don't know that I need to argue with, I'm not married, but if I were married, I wouldn't want to argue with my wife about how much water we have in the state of Colorado, because neither of us really care about water, but we might have a very different view on how that water is used, but it doesn't really serve us to do that. So unfortunately, there's no way to solve the problem of what's absolutely accurate information and facts. People argue that because they're politically polarized. Once you depolarize, once you go through skills for bridging the divide and a red-blue, what happens is you look at someone different. You say, all right, this is my wife. She's a Democrat. I'm a Republican. What really matters? Right? What really matters first is our family and how it's doing. And, in terms of national issues, some of them we can be concerned about, but we can agree more on the issue itself than the fight we're going to have about how to solve the issue. And you know what? My mom and dad were red and blue. Every single time my mother would say, he canceled my vote again. He canceled my vote again. He canceled my vote again. And eventually, after my dad passed, I said, did that really bother you? She goes, well, I wanted him to acknowledge my point of view. And that's really what changed things for her. And I think for a lot of people, that's where you go, because you're just not going to find any issue where there isn't two sides, where one says what the other side is saying is absolutely not true. It's misinformation, or it's not facts. So you got to figure out what issues are important to you, and you've got to get through the depolarization process. Otherwise, you're going to fight this way the rest of your life.
I grew up in a little town in Wisconsin. So thank you for having covered every county there.
Yep.
And but I've been reading a lot about what's going on with the social platforms, and I think everybody recognizes that things have gotten worse over the last 10 or 15 years in terms of the parties not getting along very well at all. And the research by the people that are looking at how much to blame, the social type of platforms is really one of the big problems. And what would you say has differed in the last 10 or 15 years versus, I would say, a lot more friendship before then?
Yeah, even I don't know how many of you watched the Netflix special Social Dilemma, but that's an outstanding way to view the social media environment. It's scary. It's image-based. We try to teach our children. I've got 4 grandchildren who's starting down that path. The oldest is 9. If someone doesn't want to friend you on Facebook, we try to illustrate to him that that's not really what a friend is. A friend is somebody that that you share, conversations with, that you have common ground with or common interests with. Social media is a problem that we're not going to solve overnight. It does come down to, though, I think if you knit people together at the family level, the church level, the community level, part of our cities project is going to address social media. We've got an extensive social media arm at Braver Angels as well. And, there's a recognition that you can't ignore it because it's so dominant in life today. I don't participate on Facebook and most of the social media platforms myself because I think they would waste my time. But in general, as we look at cities or churches or organizations like the YMCA, social media has to be part of the strategy, but it starts with build respect between people. Then you together can filter out the stuff on social media that just doesn't make sense or doesn't contribute to your life and what your goals are. I think if more people were, the reason why churches are so important to us is that there's a component of morality in building respect between two individuals. And I think churches are great places for that. Hopefully it'll work in the long run, but it certainly is one of those scenarios where you've got to deal with social media. We have a strategy for that. We even teach a social media workshop. So you can take a workshop at Braver Angels. It's free. It tells you how to interact with social media and how to deal with people who are in conflict with you on social media itself.
Hi, my name is Suzanne, and I heard you say that you were appointed by the president in 2020 to do COVID. Thank you. And I wanted to know, was there a divide that you had to bridge to work with the president? And if so, how'd you do?
In this particular case, it was President Trump in early 2020. And I didn't deal with him directly so much as there were a couple of senators and congressmen that were on the committee. I work with people and members of Congress now that are on both sides of the aisle. Faith and Law is a partner of ours. And then, there's issue one is on the other side of the aisle, the blue side of the aisle. Those two organizations work very well with us, and, directing the strategic initiatives at Brave Angels, we get involved. People just ask for ideas. I mean, the task force was monitoring what was happening. They were looking for ideas, checking the world over to see what worked and what didn't work. Was there disagreements on the task force? All the time. However, people didn't, it wasn't a hate-filled sort of scenario. It was a bunch of people trying to solve a big problem. So I didn't have to bridge the divide, but I don't think we contacted the Biden White House once Joe Biden became president in January of 2021. And there's been some work there. There's also been some work with other congressional offices around the country. And former Speaker Dick Gephardt and I have had conversations about how they get involved and help. So the Jimmy Carter Foundation in Georgia, we work with the Schwarzenegger Institute in California. So we wander through politics on both sides of the aisle. And typically the people we deal with, and I suspect the Biden White House, their response to us was positive because they too see the polarization and they'd like to see it get better.
So, being in the state of Florida, somebody on our chat asked the question, how do we get the discussions going on the term woke? It's it's a term that really engenders a lot of fear at a lot of levels, professional, if you're at the University of Florida, as well as on a personal level. Have you had this term come up much, or many discussions focusing on it?
We had a debate at a college campus. I'd highly recommend that we do a debate at the University of Florida among the students, and then the folks in this church could go watch. I mean, I think it's amazing how it happens, right? So in a debate, in a Brave Angels debate, you don't like Sue and I would not be going back and forth to each other in debate. We run through a moderator. So I would say to the moderator, Madam Moderator, the Sue, or whatever we refer to each other as, in Sue's case, I'd like to have you ask her this question. So you moderate the debate so that you don't get into a back and forth fight between participants. You would be shocked at how good the debates turn out. Kids debating the issue, the word woke, is a very enlightening experience. I don't know if we have a video of that debate. If we do, I'll try to find it and send it down, but encourage that debate in the church. Bring in kids in the church. It doesn't have to be young people necessarily. It can be people of any age who want to debate the issue, but get people from both sides of the aisle, bring the word up. I again believe what you're going to find is that I had a one-on-one with a woman from South Carolina or Alabama who used the phrase white supremacy with me, I don't know, 100 times in an hour. And your white resume and different things. I do humanitarian work in Africa, and she kept referring to that as my white resume. And I asked her, finally stopped her and said, tell me what you mean by that, because I really don't get it all the time. I don't spend my time looking at things like that on a regular basis. You'd be surprised how often the issue is nothing more than people don't understand the context of the word, what that really means. I know there's a lot of people out there who do not understand what people mean in total by the word woke. So you start out by getting an acknowledgement that, hey, I don't really understand what you mean by that. Let's talk about it. And then you can get into the issue. But I'd say let's do a debate. It'd be a lot of fun.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Yes, when the question I had has to do with the depolarization and some of the factors that lead into that, like gerrymandering. Is that something you can speak to? Because I feel that a lot of work at the local level can be sort of undone by districts, that are gerrymandered, and only one party has any chance of winning.
Well, as I stated earlier about the uncompetitiveness of districts, I really dislike gerrymandering. I don't know why anyone would like gerrymandering, unless, of course, you're running for a district where you want it gerrymandered in your favor so you can win easily or more easily than anywhere else. I think things like term limits need to be debated, gerrymandering need to be debated. The problem is the solutions are so often held within the hands of so very few who are very polarized themselves. And because of that, you end up with, like in Colorado, we have 8 congressional districts. We picked up a seat. The 8th congressional district is the most competitive district in the state, and I was very happy to see that. But realistically, it's the only competitive district in the state. I guess we have 2 out of 8. The other 6, whoever wins the primary wins. And it's a crazy concept. It's just like the presidential election. There's some states where you can't un-gerrymander a state regarding a presidential election, but if it's not competitive at all, it really doesn't allow for ideas to be exchanged. Gerrymandering kills debates. So there's plenty of seats that were, politically popular this 2022 election that were so uncompetitive, there was never a debate between the candidates. And how do you assess someone's worthiness or ideas to be in office if there's no debate? So I'm with you. We could have a gerrymandering discussion as well. That can be an issue. When we do a red-blue workshop or we do skills for bridging the divide, we bring up and say, all right, which issues would you like to discuss in the context of the workshop? Gerrymandering could be one of those issues that was brought up in a workshop and discussed.
All right. Anybody online that would like to ask a question? Do you see anybody in the chat, Tristan? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. This has been fabulous, I think. Absolutely.
Well, my pleasure. And let me know through Sue or someone else if you guys want to attempt to do a workshop down there. Let's have a discussion. We'll come down and do one.
All right. That sounds fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, Steve. We really appreciate it. All right. You too. And again, if you have ideas or you'd like to see further workshops on this, please